It's the WP Minute Plus, your home for long-form discussions with WordPress professionals and industry experts, covering our favorite topic, WordPress. Be sure to follow us. Search for WP Minute in your favorite podcast app. Follow this podcast and our 5-minute weekly edition. Or head to thewpminute.com/subscribe and join the newsletter. I'm told it's like a warm WordPress blanket that gets delivered to your doorstep every week. Looking for all things WordPress? The WP Minute has you covered. This episode of the WP Minute Plus is brought to you by our friends at Omnisend, the top-rated email and SMS marketing platform for WordPress stores. With Omnisend, you'll be launching pre-built e-commerce automations in no time, as well as intuitively segmenting customers based on their shopping behavior and even trying out SMS or push notifications, all from the same platform. More than 100,000 e-commerce brands use Omnisend to drive sales and build better customer relationships, converting their customers with quick-to-create, highly relevant emails and texts. Are you ready to start building campaigns that really sell and convert your customers? Find out more at omnisend.com. That's omnisend.com, OMNISEND.com, omnisend.com. And give your brand the boost it deserves. Hey, Dustin, welcome to the program.
Hello, hello.
10 years ago, episode 23, you appeared on the Matt Report. Boy, we look young. I don't have one gray hair in mine, and you are wearing the same jacket today. Folks can't see you, but you're wearing the same jacket.
I'm wearing the same jacket, and I look very young as well. That is pre-kids, so that was a long time ago.
But you have like 30 pounds of muscle on you now. What happened?
Oh, well, that's a little
CrossFit?
bit of work. Yes.
CrossFit? All right. I knew it. I
Yes.
knew it. How's that going? How's the balance of life, kids, podcasting, automatic?
Yeah, it is. It's a balance for sure. And this week is really testing me because we started back with soccer. My son's in soccer. He's in first grade. So I have a first grade son, and my daughter is in fourth grade. And so soccer started back up this week. He's like in a full year program that they took the month of November off, I guess. And then basketball started. So I am a first grade boys basketball coach for the local rec league. And then my daughter's in gymnastics and dance. And so we've got all of these things happening this week with a culmination of a Christmas party on Friday, going to Top Golf. I don't know if there's Top Golf near you, but we've got that. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're going Top Golfing and the kids are staying with friends. And so we have like a one night away from them. So, but getting to your question, doing all the things, like, man, it is hard. And I feel like earlier on, like I was very dedicated to WordPress podcasts. Like I host the Your Website Engineer podcast. And that was like, I'm not going to miss ever. Like I would go on vacation and I would schedule things, and man, it has been really hard to keep consistent. So I rely on my calendar a lot. Last night I was actually even recording, like I came down to my computer and I was like, what can I get done today? And like putting blocks on the calendar and rearranging it. And I got done with the workout about 13 minutes before we started talking, and I showered and I shaved, and I'm just like, I'm here. Like you try to fit those blocks of time in and get your priorities in. And I mean, it is hard, but I do all my work from home. I work out at home, and then I have a lot of kid running to and from places. And I mean, it's an everyday thing.
Yeah. And I'm sure life at Automatic kind of affords you that flexibility. I mean, I think Matt and company sort of really tout the fact that Automatic's been like this remote workforce forever, right? So they kind of like lead the charge in that, and there's a lot of flexibility there. We could chat about that in a minute, but I'm looking at the title of our last episode that we did on the Matt Report. It was The Rise of WordPress Media. This is stuff you and I were talking about over a decade ago, again, back in April 23rd, 2013. You and I were talking about the stuff that you and I were both doing, like putting out WordPress content, really educating, informing, hopefully entertaining some folks. Has there been a drastic difference that you've seen over the last decade of this business of creating WordPress media? Like what has changed in your life?
Yeah, what's changed in my life is I don't have the time to do it as much. And I find, and I'm seeing, like, I used to be like, I'm not going to I am going to subscribe to all the things and listen to everybody else's opinion and thing. And you don't have time to do that, right? You have time to keep your kind of your head down. And I see, like, on Twitter, I see like, oh, you're following some of the big blogs. Like, I do a lot of news for my podcast. And so there's always a segment about news. And so I'm all the time like looking for like who's doing webinars on things or what companies are in the space. And, you can tell that the bigger WordPress companies are producing that more media, or they're continuing to just be out there in the space. And I think that's what's really cool about just WordPress in general. Like, anybody can be their own voice. I don't know how many people have like started a podcast or like just done it because why not? Like, it's a good way to give back. That's my main reason why I continue to do my podcast, is because I don't have the time or the energy to like contribute back to core or, write blog posts for WordPress news or things like that. But I do have time to share, here's some updates, here's some things that are going on, here's some of the things that you need to learn about when it comes to WordPress, and here's the changes and whatnot. So I think there's a lot more media that's out there. And I think that's just kind of part of the times too, right? The YouTube is really big, like now in comparison to it was 10 years ago. Like, I don't even watch TV anymore, hardly. It's like, oh, I subscribe to these YouTube people that are building this or doing that or whatnot. And so I think that just in the general landscape of just how life is in 2023, like, there's going to be more media content.
You're coming up, if you don't realize this, Dustin, you're coming up on a 13-year anniversary for Website Engineer. Your first episode was December 3rd, 2010.
Yes.
So,
So
do you have anything planned for 13 years?
No, absolutely not. It's like, I think I'm going to publish a Matt Report podcast or something like that. That's my big claim to fame. No, I kind of like, I don't think I've ever really done like big milestone things. Maybe at 100 I did. I think I'm getting close to, let's see, I published last week, number 543. And so like after that, it's kind of like WordPress releases, right? Like, there's no big fanfare for 6.0 or 5.0. Like, yep, this is another episode. We're just going to keep chugging along. And so, no, don't have anything planned. I'm approaching so December 3rd is my anniversary for Your Website Engineer. And December 2nd, which is the day before, is my 10-year anniversary at Automatic. So I got some big milestones coming up.
Nice. And there is something for 10 years at Automatic, right?
It is sabbatical number 2.
Sabbatical number 2.
Yes.
And now that happens at 10 years, or it just happens to fall on your...
You are eligible. So at Automatic, you can get a sabbatical after you've been there with the company 5 years. And then the day you come back from your sabbatical, so you can take it anytime after you reach 5 years. And so as soon as that happens, as soon as you get back from your first sabbatical, that's when the timer starts for your second one. So I didn't take the first one in December. We were just closing on this house and it was brand new and it was winter and my kids were little. And I'm like, I don't really want to enjoy a sabbatical in the middle of the winter. And so I pushed mine off until May, and we took some vacations. I worked on the house, built a deck and stuff like that. And then then August 1st is 2024 is when I'm eligible again. So I've got I don't know, what is that? 9 months counting down to 3 months off. So that's pretty cool.
That's cool, man. That's awesome. Talk to me. Here's one thing that I really envy about you, except for the fact that maybe you can do about 50 more pull-ups than me. Your consistency with Your Website Engineer, 500 plus episodes. I have never been able to stay in the lane of one project, right? One brand. As a creator, I just, Matt Report was the longest running thing, right? So it was 10 years or so. I stopped publishing Matt Report episodes back in September last year, so over a year ago. And I focus primarily now here at the WP Minute, the WP Minute Plus podcast, focusing on WordPress news, short form and long form. This is long form. How have you stayed in the lane with Your Website Engineer? How do you just keep that core focus?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it is early on, like I mentioned, it was kind of like the drive of like, okay, I'm going to be that number one show that's most consistent. I'm always out there. Things, I'm just going to continue to bring content. And then there was a stretch where I was doing some different things at Automatic and I wasn't on a WordPress specific team. So I was kind of out of the WordPress space for a little bit. And so that's kind of where I had some stalling, maybe 2021 and 2022, just there wasn't things that I'm seeing. Like, I work in support, and now, like, when you're in support, you see a lot of stuff that probably shouldn't happen on WordPress sites. And so that kind of gives you some fuel for continuing with it. So I think it's just kind of like that. I don't know. When I started, I always thought, oh, this will be really cool someday when I can say I have 500 episodes of like something. And like you, I'm not really good at finishing. This honestly is like the only thing that I am good at staying consistent about, because my wife and I have, or my wife has she's a full-time small business owner, and we've got 2 or 3 sites. And so like a lot of my WordPress stuff comes from there. That's where I get my itch to like build stuff and create and, do an e-learning platform or a subscription thing or do that. And so I get to do all of that with her, but we are very bad at like finishing. We're really good at coming up with ideas and getting it like 90% of the way done, and then be like, we got to move on to this next thing. Or like, I'm very reactive in the fact that it's like, oh, I should have prepared for this podcast, yesterday, but it was like, oh, I've got 3 minutes until I sign on. Let me come up with some questions that I want to add, or anything like that. So it's just one of those things that I don't know, it's hard, but I kind of have that drive of like, I just want to continue to create content. And this is my only thing that is successful, I guess, in a way, and easy for me to continue to give back to the WordPress community.
Are you the type of creator that backs everything up?
Back up as in like saves
like
everything?
Save everything. You've got disks, you've got terabytes of NAS storage, all that stuff.
No, not really. I keep the MP3 file, and then the MP3 file is obviously uploaded to Libsyn or, whatever host. And that's all I really create. I've been in the process of like moving my life into Notion. So another thing that I'm really terrible at is like, oh, I need this tool to do this thing. So there was like a stretch of like 50 episodes that I'm going to use day one to create my show notes. And then before that, it was Notes. And then it was Evernote. And it's been like all these things. So I've got all of that stuff everywhere. And so like, I'm just trying to consolidate. And like with Notion, it's really cool. You can create like schedules and a calendar. And I'm going to publish this here. And it's got the template and everything built in. So I have like my whole show notes and I just fill it out. But I have, like I said, I have 543 episodes, and I have like back to 518 in Notion so far. So I still have 500 more to go. And like in the process, like I always feel like it's a good thing to get updated with like the latest in WordPress too. So like so for example, like I'll take 517, I'll open that up in the editor. If there's a reusable block I'm using now, like I'll swap that out. I'll fix formatting. Like for a long time, I was using Markdown in my show notes. And so like the Markdown needs Jetpack to work right. And so like now I'm backing those out and fixing those so they don't need Jetpack. And, just like trying to like, I don't know where your question was or what your question was all the way back, but just like continuing to, produce this content and like, how do I keep everything backed up? And I don't really like, there's tons of like data that's out there, and it's like, am I really going to use this thing that I created 12 years ago? Well, all the interfaces are different now. I think that's one of the things that's hard in WordPress. Like I've got a lot of good video content that I created before like the new dashboard, right? Before MP5, I think is what it was called, like the old school, like 3.0 dashboard. And it's like, well, this is not really usable at all because like nobody's going to watch this. They're like, this guy recorded it in the Stone Age. Like it's not even, it's not even legit now.
Is this 480p? Like where was, how old is this guy?
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. I often joke, you probably a mutual friend of ours probably is WP Tuts from YouTube. And he was just posting the other day on Twitter, or yesterday, in fact, that he's like, oh, I'm back. I'm backing up all my catalog of videos. It's taking me all day, all this stuff. And I'm like, here's the easy mode. Don't back anything up, Paul. Like just don't. I don't, but he's, obviously everybody has different, and it's just, I'm always curious to peer into the mindset of other creators, because I think there are those who back everything up, script absolutely everything, storyboard everything, are super organized. They have their content calendar out like 2 or 3 quarters, and it's, I super appreciate that. But 1, life with kids. I have 3 young kids. And 2, I have a full-time job just like you. I work at Gravity Forms. You work at Automatic. And this is just like the side hustle, so it's just like, I'm getting this stuff out there. If I ever need to download it again, I'll go to my web host and I'll download it, or the podcast host and I'll download it, or I'll go to YouTube and download the VOD. And, what am I going to do with this video later? No one's going to want it.
Right. And a terrible game to play. Terrible. And I'm in the midst of this. Like we were talking before we started that I've got new machines and like hard drives are full, and like the Synology that I have that backs everything up, that's not super readily accessible right now. And so like my wife does some photo editing as part of her side gigs. And like, she's always like, I need more space to do this thing. So then I've got to back things up. And then I always feel uncomfortable, like, oh, I've backed this up to a Synology it's rated, so it's on there twice, but I don't feel comfortable deleting it from another machine because we might lose, like there's all these things. And it's just like you said, if you don't save things, it just is easier on your brain and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Talk to me about staying in the lane of just audio. Is it really a time and resource thing? Or, I mean, you have some videos up on your YouTube channel. As of this recording, there was one 3 months ago, why full site editing is the real deal. Is it just a time and resource thing, going into YouTube, creating other content? What's up?
Yeah. So I have this aspiration for like actually making money from YouTube someday. Will that happen? Who knows? But, and I was going to do like short form videos. I've done longer webinars. That one that you just referenced was like a webinar recording that I did. So it's a little longer form content. And honestly, I used to do that when I was full time. It was like, I'm going to prepare once a month, the first whatever day. I think it was always the first Friday at noon. I was going to do a webinar and just kind of teach something. And just having like that consistent schedule, I find is really helpful. One of the things that makes it difficult is like my schedule always changes based on like, I have to put my availability in. So you referenced earlier that Automatic is super flexible, and it is, but it's not spontaneous, is one way that we like to say in support. Like it's super flexible and you can pick your hours, but you have to pick them 2 or 3 weeks in advance. And so one of the hard parts is like, I'll have an idea and it's like, oh, I really want to do this podcast or I want to do this thing. And it's like, well, let me look at my schedule. The next time I have a 2-hour block of time when there's no kids around, so it's quiet and it's not bedtime, like that's in 2 weeks. And so like 2 weeks go by and it's like, oh, well, I'm not really interested in that right now. And I always found that audio was always just so easy for me to do. A lot of times, probably of the 500 episodes, there's probably like 300 of them that I never edited. Like, well, I would go in and I would edit, like my show has 4 or 5 sections. Like if I messed up a segment of the show, like I would just start the whole thing over again. And so I would just like chop that chunk out. And now I've been editing these last, 15 episodes, 20 episodes, quite a while with the script. And now like I can just highlight all the text, and I'm actually starting to work with Descript and doing some audio things. So it's also like, you can see my background here is like boring. I'm like, I don't have anything to show behind me. Like I don't have a setup that looks good for video. Plus a lot of video content is like, even like a talking head, right? You talk a little bit and then you show something on the screen and then you talk some more, like just that setting all the stuff up to get a good camera angle. It feels like it's a lot of work.
Yeah. It is a lot of work. And by the way, for the listener, I'll be appearing on, or you'll hear me on Dustin's podcast as well. Maybe I can talk to you on your channel about how much money you can or cannot make with YouTube, because I do have AdSense enabled on the channel, and we can chat about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot of work. The landscape of going back to what we originally talked about, again, a decade ago, WordPress Media, hats off again to folks like you who have been consistent, persistent with creating this content, because there's a lot of folks out there, especially in the YouTube landscape, where they look at WordPress. In fact, I was just, before we hopped on, I emailed you, said, hey, I'm going to be a couple minutes late. I was having a meeting with another sort of like YouTube brand in the space. And there's a lot of folks out there on the YouTube world that are just like, hey, get this hot affiliate deal. It's a WordPress plugin. Here it is. Like, I'm going to talk about that. And then next week, another hot affiliate deal came through. So I'm going to talk about that. And listen, I don't knock, I can't knock the hustle, as long as you're like hustling for the right reasons. Like you're trying to build like this, whatever, passive income business. It's okay. Like I have some degree of forgiveness in that realm, but if you're just like, I don't even care, and I don't care what happens to these WordPress users after they use this cheap plugin or terrible theme, like that's where it really bugs me. But it's also, I realize that this passion for WordPress, like the folks that maybe you and I talk to, I would say is like the 1% of WordPress who actually like really care. Maybe not your content, but my content is probably like 1% of WordPress. It doesn't make any money, right? Like I'm talking to a limited audience, not on my YouTube channel, but on my podcast for sure, because it's analyzing the WordPress industry, the community, the business side of things. The YouTube channel is like, the sports section of the newspaper. People come like, oh, this is cool. Show me how to do this WordPress thing.
Yeah.
But the podcast and the newsletter, that's me analyzing the industry. And in my opinion, is a maximum of 10,000 English-speaking people in the world who care about what's happening at Automatic with WordPress core, with the economics of WordPress. That's my cap. I don't have a question here. After saying all that, but like, where do you see those pockets of audience?
I think that's kind of like, I always saw that kind of as a limitation of like, I know that there's really no like ceiling as an entrepreneur. Like you could make a bunch of money doing, things. But again, like to get a free audience to listen, again, we are in this weird space where it's like, okay, we do have it's people that are interested in WordPress and they're kind of geeky enough to want to listen to WordPress podcasts. And, so that's not even like even a lot of store owners or whatnot. So it's hard to really know whether you're talking to, and I've always had the challenge of like, is my podcast made for beginners? Is it made for like people who are store owners? Is it for developers who want to learn more stuff? Like, where is that? And I always found that was kind of it was a hard thing. And it was like, man, if I would have chose a different thing, like remodeling my house, like there's a ton more people who, even if they don't ever have the desire to remodel a house or like build this thing, like they might watch the channel because it would be interesting. And so, so it's always like, oh man, like, did we pick the right thing? Like, again, we're doing it because it's a passion thing. Like we enjoy talking about WordPress. We enjoy like seeing the improvements that, especially, like all the things that have changed in the last 15 years. Like it's been really cool to watch and see and kind of like, oh, I'm kind of an influencer. Like it's kind of one of those influencer things where it's like, oh, you go to a WordCamp, people know who you are and, you'll talk and you'll stop but you're at the grocery store and nobody knows who you are. And that's exactly the way that I like it.
Yeah. I have a joke about that. I was doing a lot of mentoring in a local business accelerator pre-COVID when they had a lot of in-person stuff. And, my podcast the WordPress podcast, a lot of those folks that would bring me in to talk about WordPress was, because they knew I did a podcast. They didn't listen to the WordPress podcast because they weren't like users, but they were like, oh, I know you do this thing about WordPress consistently. Come in and talk to the group about building a WordPress site for their business that they're just starting. And so then eventually I started like, hey, I'm talking to all, and my family has run businesses in the local community for 50 plus years. So I have a strong sense of like community and entrepreneurship and tying those two together. So then I was like, hey, I'm talking to all these local businesses. I'm going to start this local business podcast. Now, again, this is pre-COVID. And then I started it literally 2 episodes in. I walked into a coffee shop and somebody was like, hey, you're that guy that does that podcast. So I was like, you use WordPress? And they were like, no, you do. Oh, it was called South Coast FM. You do South Coast FM. I'm like, how did that even happen? How did that happen in like 2 seconds? It took me like 20 years in WordPress to be like recognized and like, but it's weird. Like when God, as a creator, always look at the other side of the fence and say, if I just did something else, I might be a little bit more successful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if I didn't cover WordPress, right, maybe I would have a different audience. And sometimes it really pulls at you as a creator, right? And as a business person at the end of the day.
I watch a lot of like YouTube of like house projects or like some builders and creators. And I've started, I don't know, maybe in 2021, maybe is when I kind of really got into like, okay, I'm going to start watching a lot of YouTube. And it's just been incredible to see that I've done nothing that's outside of, I've barely done any WordPress or YouTube stuff. And I've watched these creators go from, they went from 500,000 to 800,000 to 1 million subscribers. And they're just like, the one guy that I follow, his name is Jason, and he does Bourbon Moth is his brand name, but he does like woodworking projects. And basically he has somebody that just edits everything that he does. And then he just watches it and then does a voiceover. Like, so his editor puts it all and he just sits there and he watches it. And he's like, oh, this is when I did this and this, and just, he's got some dry sense of humor, just really kind of a funny guy. And now it's like, oh, I'm getting sponsored by this thing. And he has a non-woodworking podcast that basically him and another creator just talk about like what they've been doing. And it's so interesting to hear like, oh yeah, I got this deal from so-and-so. And it's like, when you have that many subscribers and that many things, it's like, man, if I had went down the other path, like, could I have had a Home Depot sponsor that helped me turn my fireplace into, something amazing or, build out all these things that I wanted to. And it's like, oh man, is that the thing? I don't know.
So we probably talked about this a decade ago, but is there a business model right now? Do you sell sponsorship on the podcast or you're not allowed to because of the YouTube, because of the automatic day job?
I've had a few people reach out and say they were interested in sponsoring. I don't know if it would be a conflict or not. I've always kind of like just pursued like, can you give me a free account? Let me see what they're like. I don't want to just say like, oh, this is brought to you by Factor Foods or, whatever. Like, I think it should be WordPress related and it should be something that I actually use. And so I haven't taken it, but I had a goal in 2023, which didn't happen because the year's almost over, but like I wanted to at least as a hobby project, like I don't really pay for anything. Like the hosting is, like hosting costs for my website is all through Automatic because I use a product. I use Pressable for that. And then my hosts, like that's a few pennies or whatever for the podcast host. So I don't really have like a lot of expenses. Like every plugin I use is like one of our products or whatnot. But like I have a goal, like I'd really like to be able to like upgrade my personal Apple devices with just income from my podcast. So like, that was kind of where my goal was. Like, if I could go to YouTube and get enough, like I have enough subscribers to start getting ads, but I don't have enough watch time. So that's like where my problem is right now. And so I think like there is some drive to like try to make money, but on the other hand, my wife has successful things going on. And if I can optimize her sites to do things to make more money, like it's all kind of the same, right?
Yeah. So that's not the leading metric. By the way, Pressable, fantastic sponsor of the WP Minute. Thank you, Pressable. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. You look at what's available out there. I spent 2.5 years in the podcast industry working at a podcast host after I left Pagely, which was another WordPress host that got sold to GoDaddy. And as somebody who helped folks start their podcasts, a lot of people come in jaded to this industry and they go, hey, I saw Mike Maron, Joe Rogan, Whitney Cummings, like your favorite, whatever, like comedian podcasts that have been literally beating the streets and going to comedy clubs for decades before starting a podcast,
right?
Already famous in their own circles, making money. And then people go, oh, all it is plugging in a microphone and talking and then getting sponsorships. It doesn't work that way. And even harder in the audio landscape than it is in the YouTube landscape, though the YouTube income has dropped significantly because of YouTube. Right? They're really starting to tighten that belt around income, which is just this complete reset to owning your .com, right? Owning a WordPress website, driving traffic to that, building an email list while you can before that gets squeezed, because that'll be the next thing that big tech companies go after. And it's important to like build your brand, roll up your sleeves, get to work. And the decrease in Google organic traffic also hitting creators a lot this year. And it's like, hey, did the algorithm and the traffic, were we supposed to get this to begin with? Was this like a steroid injection to creators? And guess what? It's hard. Just like it's running a traditional brick and mortar business is hard, so is this. And you're going to have to drive people, create amazing content. And now you get a fraction of that traffic that you used to get pre-AI and pre-COVID and, all of this stuff. So it's an interesting world. What do you think held, I don't want to say held you back because you kind of answered it. You're not really looking for that money, but are you going to put a plan in place that makes $2,500 to $5,000 next year with your content to pay for a new Apple laptop? Or
right? Yeah. I think that, like, I don't know what that number is. Like, you think when you back it out for a year, like, oh, if I make $2,500, $2,400, right? That's easy math. That's $200 a month. Like, okay, like I can probably do that with a sponsorship here or there. Like some some wins there. So the hard part is like with working at Automatic, like I can't really charge for anything that's WordPress related.
Sure.
Like that's part of the conflict of interest. And so I don't know. So it just kind of makes that a little bit of a sticky situation. So, but yeah, if I can continue to like pump out some content and get the views or, whatever, like I do want to have a plan in place to like be more consistent for next year. And just kind of like, I think what's hard for me is like, since I do the news part of the show, like I can't batch record very easily because like it's okay, there's no news because I just recorded 10 seconds ago. Like that doesn't really make sense. But yeah, I think it's just kind of like sitting down and just really kind of focusing and just, I don't know. Next year, I think is a big quote unquote, I'm going to say big year. I turn 40 next year. And so it's kind of I'm trying to like line all these things up to like, okay, it's going to be a sweet year. Like, okay.
That's why you don't have gray hair yet.
Right.
God, I'm so jealous of you.
Yeah. So I think that money's not the driving factor, but like it
Sure.
is kind of nice to say like, oh, hey, there's money set aside over here in my quote unquote business that I can use to upgrade, or I can pay for the subscription, or I could do this or that. And so like, it's not, okay, this is going to financially contribute to the household, but $200 or $300 a month is certainly nice. Like I have affiliate relationships with like ConvertKit and, you know, some of those things that we still use, but I don't know, like it's really hard as like, I don't have, as a happiness engineer at Automatic, like I don't get my own personal referral code to use WordPress.com for stuff.
Oh, the money you would make.
Because because we now offer this on WordPress.com. We offer like it's called Built By or Built, and it's $4.99 for like a business site with 5-page site. And this is what a lot of my friends need when they need a website. And it's like, well, this is all you need. Just go over here and do it. And they're done like in 4 or 5 days. But like, I don't get any kickback from that, even though like, I don't know. So I don't know. So your whole story report, like it'd be great to outline a plan. And it's one of those things that I'm always behind. And then it's like, oh, well, in January, now I'm going to create the plan for the year, but now it's almost February, you know, like, so I just need to sit down, and like today is actually probably a good day because it's a flex day from work. I've got to work on this weekend because 24-hour support and whatnot. So it's like, maybe I should just sit down and just kind of plan the year a little bit.
Now, couldn't you, I just signed up for actually a WordPress.com account for a side project that I have. And couldn't you put ads through Jetpack? Or your site's on Pressable, right? So you wouldn't be able to maybe get into that ad network. But WordPress.com has a bunch of tools for creators where you could monetize. And that would be ads, just like you're getting YouTube ads. You're not really competing against WordPress because you're using the product.
Right.
That could be a thing that you do.
I think you can do that with Jetpack. And again, it's one of those things that like Jetpack has 32 features that I don't even know about, like, because I just don't have time to like play with it. And it's always like, I always say on my podcast too, like, this is a do as I say, not as I do show. Like, you know, keep your plugins updated, keep your stuff like ready to go. And it's just like, as a small business owner, like there's a lot of times it's like, I know that people have had issues with this latest version of at WooCommerce. Like we had to have a hot fix release. Like I'm not updating until I know that this is ready. And so there is some good stuff from coming behind the scenes and seeing those types of notifications, but man, it's just hard to keep like all the things updated and running and looking good. And I went through this account, like let's see, my wife has an e-learning business where we sell like virtual CE for pharmacists, for continuing education. And again, it's a niche of a niche of a niche. So it's like people that are pharmacists that are interested in functional medicine, and they want to pay for CE to set in a thing. Right. It was really good before COVID happened. And then COVID like kind of locked everything down. It was an online thing before, and we were selling like 100 tickets per event. And now it's like, now we can sell like 25 tickets to an event. It's just like, what happened here? But anyways, getting to the long story, but I was using Sensei for a while, and then I'm like, oh, this LearnDash looks better. So let me go use LearnDash, because I knew behind the scenes, Sensei wasn't getting any updates. There was no team working on it. But now like Sensei is a viable product, and there's lots of development and a lot of cool stuff that they're doing. So now it's like, now I want to move back to Sensei, and now I've got 800 people that have accounts that some have stuff in LearnDash, some have in Sensei. Some have like marked things as watched in LearnDash. And now I've got to like open up 2 windows and like log in as them and like mark them it was a full 2 weeks, like working 1 to 2 hours a day, like to go through this process to keep everything updated. And so like my life is easier in the future, but like sometimes it's just like that really big pain point of like, oh man, this is going to stink. Like I have 500 podcast episodes and I want to add these 2 blocks to them. Like it's going to take a while to do, but in the end, like I think it's worth it.
And your wife's just looking at you like, Dustin, why are you touching my website again? Just leave it alone.
Right. She's like, I was so excited. I'm like, I only have 500 left. I've done like 300. She's like, okay. Like, I don't think it really, all my other work got piled up. And so, but I'm like, this was one thing too, that it was like, it has been this way for like a year. Like there's people oh, I'm looking for my course and I can't find it. Well, they're looking in the LearnDash area, but it's in Sensei. And it's just like, okay, this will solve like a lot of our customer support issues. It will solve a lot of things to be in one system, but man, it was a real pain.
Awesome stuff. Dustin, it's been a pleasure catching up after 10 years. Hey, let's do it again in another 10 years, or actually in a couple minutes, but let's
absolutely.
do it again over here in 10 minutes, man. Thanks for hanging out today. Your website engineer, anywhere else folks can go to say thanks?
And that's the main place. If you want some outdated YouTube content, that's over at youtube.com/yourwebsiteengineer. But yeah.
2024, big goals. We're going to see 100,000 subs by the end of 2024.
Let's do it.
All right, Dustin, thanks for hanging out today. That's it for today's episode. Get the weekly newsletter at thewpminute.com/subscribe. Want to support the show and join a Slack group filled with WordPress professionals like you? Talk about the news, share your WordPress business content, and network with others. Head to thewpminute.com/support and get access to our group. Support the show for as little as $5 or more if you feel we provided more value. Thanks to our pillar sponsors, Pressable, Bluehost, and OmniSend. Thanks to our Foundation Plus sponsors, WP World, Image SEO, and Hostinger. Thanks to all of our annual supporting members and you, the listener. Without your support, the WP Minute wouldn't be possible. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.